After e4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, f4 and d5, the Vienna Gambit is on the board and black is playing the main response against it. So now, as mentioned in the previous videos, we're going to go through taking the pawn in d5. This is what I'm recommending to play. It's a deflection from the usual variation what the black player is expecting, and now you're already catching your opponent unprepared. After knight takes in d5, we are allowing on purpose this whole idea of queen h4 by taking the free pawn in e5. Yes, this is a free pawn, even though you might wonder, okay, but now black plays knight takes e3, pawn takes back, and now queen h4 is possible. Well, of course, here we're not going to play g3 because queen e4 wins the rook for the black player, but obviously, if you're watching these videos of the repertoire, you are a strong player, so you don't need that. King e2, and now, instead of queen e4, which we went through extensively in previous occasions, we're going to play bishop to g4, which is the main move. And obviously we can't move the king because then we lose the queen and the game, so knight f3. We are attacking the queen, but the queen doesn't have to move because the knight is pinned. So we're going to go through two options here. One of them is developing the bishop to c5, obviously threatening the square f2, and the other one is knight to c6. The idea of obviously of speeding up development. Let's start with bishop to c5. So there's a threat of queen f2, so obviously the move is d4. Bishop moves to b6, and now h3, attacking the bishop. You may wonder that the pawn isn't really attacking the bishop because then the queen will take the rook, but the queen will actually get trapped in there, as I will show you if you stick around. So let's see, for example, black castles now, to go on with just the normal developing moves and to be able to allow the rook into the game, potentially maybe play f6, exploiting the fact that we cannot play bishop c4 with check or queen to b3 either, and none of these moves will be particularly useful. Yeah, bishop c4 will be useful, but there's no way to play it. We can't move the king, and we don't want to go to, I don't know, e3. Well, that would be a little bit too much. Although, to be fair, it looks like the center is close enough for king e3 to be possible, but we are not AlphaZero. So let's keep it real. Now the move is thematic. This is the type of move you will most of the time play to challenge the queen in h4 in the queen h4 variation against this line of the Vienna Gambit. And you often play a move like this even when you play the king's gambit. Queen e1 attacking the queen. Now let's look at this example. Queen h4. I'm about to show you what happens here with the capture of the bishop, which now is indeed possible. Take the bishop. And after queen takes rook, king to f2, the black queen cannot move. None of these squares is accessible except the one where she is, which is in h1. She can't move anywhere without being taken. We just need to find a way to attack it. So even now playing the best moves for the engine by black, we're going to win. A move like f5, just so you know, threatening to swap with this pawn is not possible because bishop c4 check, you will win the queen straight away. So you can't allow a check. c5 by black now, and you play the crucial move, queen to e4. This is very important because you need to put pressure in h7. So after pawn takes, we take back. We didn't really want to go through this very nasty looking discover check. So now knight to d7, developing. These are just examples of moves. White goes on with bishop to g5. And the idea is very simple. Bishop to d3 wins material because the rook is attacking the queen and the queen can't move anywhere on the h file. And black is lost because we're also threatening checkmate in h7. So bishop d3 is the threat. And best move by the engine will be knight takes e5. This is desperate. Obviously the idea is to sacrifice material to allow the queen an escape. So knight e5, you will get yourself pinned. Whereas queen e5 is the best move here. Just take the knight. And after h5, best by black, queen f4. This is simply to protect the pawn in g4 further. So after pawn takes, for example, queen takes, this queen hasn't been able to go anywhere for quite a few moves, and there's no way out. The engine made that knight sacrifice, which is not something that humans are going to be able to see because it's completely crazy. The idea was knight takes, blah, 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 and then queen to h8 now. Now rook to e1, and we're going to keep playing this game with the bishop pair against the rook, which means we're completely winning. In fact, if you make black play this move, rook f to e8, white doesn't have to swap, as if we were winning in material, which we technically are, but not too much if you think about it. We only have one more point, but we have the bishop pair. So anyway, white goes on with queen d7. Let's just play a couple more moves and then we're going to close this line. Attacking the rook. Rook to d8. Also because of the arrival of bishop to e7. Our king is completely safe. Our knight protects d4 and h4. White goes on with bishop to c4, fluid development, threatening mate, queen h5 only move to protect from the mate, bishop to d3, with the idea of playing c4, c5, d5, d6, and so on. We got a pass pawn, position evaluated +5 or something like that. So let's move on to the next line. After e4, e5, knight c, f6, f4, d5. Okay, let's take in d5. Black takes back, taking e5. Knight takes, pawn takes, and now queen h4 is possible. King e2, bishop g4, knight to f3. And we're looking at this move now. Bishop to c5. Okay, d4. And after bishop to b6, h3, attacking the bishop. And after castle, queen to e1. So earlier we saw what happens when the queen moves away. We got to take the bishop and we're winning. What happens when the queen takes our queen? Okay, king takes back. And now the bishop can move back to h5. Black is preserving the bishop pair, but is down a pawn. We also have a bishop pair anyway, and we got a better center. So white now goes on with the development the way it looks like in this Vienna. This is how you're going to be castling. King f2, the bishop moves, and then the rook can go potentially to e1. So let's look at three options now, just to see how to take this, because now this is quite an open game. Not very, very open, but both players have the bishop pair. So that means there's a million things that can happen. h6, g6. G6 is completely rubbish, obviously, right now, but G6 later on. Black might even play C6 and then play bishop D8, bishop E7, and then rook moves and then bishop F8 and then go in fianchetto. Will be completely crazy and completely nonsensical, but that's just the point I'm trying to make, is that we're not going to be able to learn any theory anymore because there's no more theory. We went through how we're going to play this. This is how you're going to play. Now we're going to mention the ideas and the plans behind this certain setup, and you try to memorize them. So let's look at three ideas. If, let's say, black plays f6, why? Because you might think that the black player might want to swap with this extremely strong center of the white player. Take, we have an isolated pawn, it's a pass pawn, but then black will have quite a pressure on the knight. Doesn't mean anything, not too much, but then black can play knight d7, put pressure on this pawn, the knight is pinned, and it seems like it just makes sense because it challenges the center. Okay, bishop c4 check, king h8, and e6. White is winning. There's a very strong pass pawn. You can't stop it. d5 is coming as well. Rook e1 will be unbothered. Oh, by the way, d5 is not coming immediately because the bishop, but it will come eventually. You might also play a move like g4 at some point, and bishop a3 are possible moves. The bishop here will be godly. You'd be threatening e7 with the bishop, attacking this diagonal, the rook in e1. The computer already evaluates this as game over. In this position, what happens after, let's say, bishop takes in f3? How to take it from here? Okay, take with the pawn. Unite the pawn structure and then get ready to play the rook to g1. This will be a very good place. The bishop can go to h6. So let's make an example. A move like c5, if you're wondering. So we went through f6 to try and dismantle the center. Well, let's look at what happens if black plays something like c5, d5. And you're completely winning here. We got two pawns. One of them is a pass pawn. You can support it with c4 as well. I mean, these 2 pawns will surely cost at least one piece to the opponent. So what happens after knight to c6 developing? Okay, rook to b1, best move. And after 4, okay, white goes on with f4. Also because you might want to play bishop g2. Because the thing is that the pawn in b7 is very weak. But it depends on what the opponent does. So for example here, if black plays, we're going to look at 2 options. If black plays f5, bishop check, king moves, a4. The position is secured now. The opponent might have been threatening to play a4, maybe the idea of playing knight a5, or maybe even rook to a5. But still, there's no way through. That's the problem. f4 is also important to stop the knight from trying to take the pawn in e5, because the pawn in d4 is pinned. Anyway, we have the bishop pair, and now we've got these 2 pawns. White is completely winning, especially after bishop to a3. The center cannot be penetrated. And in this position, if instead of a move like a5, what happens after knight to e7? Which was probably the initial idea of playing knight to c6. Knight to d7 now has got places to go to and maybe some ambitions. Bishop to c4 now stops knight to d5. So after knight, oh, and by the way, c6 to support the knight in d5 doesn't work because that's how good it is to have a rook in b1. So after knight to f5, h4, stopping the knight from going to h4, and after h5, bishop to d3 attacks the knight. The knight can't move anywhere except back to e7 or maybe h6 with the idea of going to g4. But that's not a problem because he will be staying in g4 forever. If knight to h6, for instance, whatever the opponent will do, we're completely winning in this position because we're going to play f5, f6, and then rook to g1, the bishop to h6, position is completely winning for white. If knight h6 does come, king to e2 is the best move. Okay, let's see. Knight to g4, rook f1. The position is valued at +4 or almost +5. Rook to f1, bishop to e3, then c4, c5, and we should be able to infiltrate the rook on the 7th rank. There's nothing here. The knight in g4 looks annoying, but in reality it's just doing nothing. It's threatening nothing. We're going to play f5, f6 at some point. We don't even care if after bishop e3 knight takes, obviously, because you can take with the king. And even if black plays something like rook to b8 to put more defense over this pawn, rook to b5, and we're going to close the line here. White has got the bishop pair. The idea is to play f5, f6, very strong. Black can't move the bishop back to a7 because then you will win the pawn in a5. This knight has absolutely no attacking chances. It's a stupid knight. So let me just show you the last line. We went through bishop takes and f6 as ideas. What happens after knight c6? Immediately retaining the bishop pair for black. White develops bishop to d3, and after rook a to d8, this looks like the most normal variation. White now plays a4. The idea is to continue with rook to e1, knight to h4. Obviously rook e1 is there to protect the pawn in e5. Remember this pattern because the knight is always going to be threatening to take the pawn in e5. And later I'm going to show you what happens when the black player does take the pawn in e5 after taking the knight in f3. It doesn't go well for black. It goes really bad. White after rook e1 will have an idea of playing knight h4 and then g4 and give the knight away for the bishop and play on with the bishop pair. So let's look at these two ideas and then we're going to close this line. Black playing, let's say, a5. How are we going to make progress in this type of game? Okay, rook to e1 is the best move. That's why we play a move like king to f2 in the Vienna Gambit more often than not, because you got castling and having the king safe because the queens are gone, and the rook is not needed in the f file because there's a bishop in h5 that puts quite solid defense over f7. This is not always the case, but at least in this line you can see it is. Knight e7, bishop to e3, lasering the board, and now that knight can't move. So after rook f to e8, the knight is now unpinned. G4, bishop g6 only move, and now bishop takes e7. Very surprisingly. Well, bishop takes d3 is not possible. There's no Zwischenzug here because you can take the rook in d8. So after the rook takes back, now another swap. Bishop takes bishop. If I don't have my bishop pair, then neither will my opponent will. So after pawn takes, rook a to b1, thematic move. And after rook d to e8, it looks fine for black. This game looks just fine for black, but white has much more control over the center. And it looks weird because we have a knight against the bishop, but this is just better for white simply because of c4. And after c5, we should be winning that pawn in b7, and c6 is too late to play because we can win the bishop. So now we've learned these very crucial patterns in this line of the Vienna. Let's see what happens after a4, black playing a6 instead of a5, and then we're going to close this. So here, a6. Very similarly, we play rook b1. Now in this case, the black player might have had the idea of playing knight to a5. How to deal with this? Okay, g4 attacks the bishop, bishop moves. Do you see how the moves are happening again and again? But in this case, let's look at this difference. There's a difference here. Black can play bishop to a7. The knight's protecting b7. How to behave now? Bishop to d2 comes. The idea is to play c4, obviously. And when the knight moves, rook to b7 will come with an attack on this bishop, on this pawn. It looks amazing. Even now, if you think about it, the best move by black, according to the engine, is bishop to d6. So to show you that idea, just to show you that is not enough for black to stop white from playing this. Rook to b1 move is an excellent move in this variation. Remember it. Now white goes on with h4. Typical idea you play against the Caro-Kann when you want to play h5 trapping the bishop, but in this case the black bishop is always going to be able to just swap pieces equally, so there's nothing there. But after h6 now, white plays king to g2. Bishop takes, by the way, is completely favorable for white. White here as an idea of playing c4 and then c5. There will be an attack on the knight, just like there will be an attack on b7. It's too strong to meet. And if instead of bishop takes in e3, if instead of that black just plays knight to c6, normal move, resigns about this idea, realizes that doesn't work. Oh, sorry, the bishop was supposed to be in g6. So if instead of bishop takes d3, Black plays knight c6. Okay, this bishop. Black takes back. Yeah, we've just opened the file for the rook. And it doesn't look like the f file is particularly strong. But now white plays rook to e4, reinforcing the defense of the square d4. And the setup goes on pretty much like this. Let's say knight goes to e7, maybe the idea maybe of going to d5. None of this is going to work. White plays c4, stops that. And remember, the crucial idea of playing c5 always. Rook to b8, preventing the attack on b7. Still, white plays bishop to b4, pinning the knight to the rook. But either way, whatever black does, we're going to close the line by playing d5. And nothing stops us from playing d6 and produce a passed pawn. So from the start, e4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, f4. And now the main line with d5, we take in d5. Knight takes back, we win the pawn. We give black a strong initiative, but it doesn't matter because there's nothing really. King e2, it's all fine. Bishop to g4, knight f3. And in the previous examples, we went through bishop to c5 and everything that happens next. What happens after knight to c6? Not much difference. Now there's the thematic queen to e1. So that's how you want to take this game. Although in this case, this looks weird because, as I mentioned to you earlier, something that I would have showed, what happens after the knight taking the pawn in e5, exploiting the pin? This, well, obviously not now because the queen's attacking the queen. So what happens after queen takes? We have to take back with the king. And after bishop takes and pawn takes, it looks like black just wins the pawn in e5. We're still equally material, but it looks fine for black. Also, we have an isolated pawn in f3. White goes on with rook to b1, attacking b7. The idea is to place the rook on the 7th rank, and there's no coming back already because that's going to happen no matter what. Now think about it, rook to b8. You could play a move like bishop a6. The pawn can't take, obviously, and pawn going to b6 means you can play d4, attacking the knight, and when the knight moves, you can play bishop to c6. It's going to be beautiful. It seems confusing now because I'm just giving insights of what's going to happen, but you'll see all of the setups that are going to take place. So let's go on now. Let's see, after rook to b1, we're threatening to go into the 7th rank, and you think that that's a very preventable thing. In reality, it's not. You'll see what happens. Knight taking the pawn in f3 with check, and king goes to f2. We're down a pawn, but now things are just looking really good for us. The knight can't move anywhere except e5, g5, and h4, so you're thinking, okay, well, I can actually go to lots of squares. Well, knight d4 allows us to go with the tempo, obviously d4. Let's look at this move. Knight to h4, and then we're going to look at knight g5. Knight to h4, we still play d4. And now, castling is impossible for black in order to prevent us from reaching the 7th rank with the rook, because bishop to g5 wins the piece. What happens after b6? Okay, well, bishop b5 check. And after the king moves, of course, c6 is not possible, so king to c8, d8. White goes on with rook to e1, threatening checkmate. And things are looking really bad because, well, let's say, for example, bishop to d6 is not possible. Bishop to g5 wins a piece. Bishop to g6 to e7 cannot happen because you're attacking it with multiple pieces. So the knight in h4 is lost. If instead black plays bishop to e7, then you got this incredible move, rook to e7. Boom! It's beautiful because when the king takes, you're up a piece and there's no way, there's no visions or anything. You're threatening to play rook to e7 with all the threats of the world. Bishop to g5 comes now, you're gonna use the bishop pair against the rook, so you're completely winning. At this point of my life, I'm convinced that the bishop pair can defeat everything you can possibly think of. In this position, after king to f2, the knight has just taken our pawn. What happens after knight to g5? Okay, now we go straight in the 7th rank, and this is looking really good for white, obviously. Bear in mind that this is just terrible. It's a targetable pawn, and after d4 and bishop to d6, it's true that the black player didn't have to go through the check of the bishop, but now black will have to lose a knight. Didn't you notice that? Well, fine, what happens if black doesn't do this stupid blunder and actually goes to e7 to protect the knight? Well, here you just take, right? You don't have to memorize moves, memorize the patterns. What to play that, you can give a rook for 2 pieces and end up with the bishop pair, do it. At least in this game, certainly do it. So in this position, after rook to b7, we mentioned how c6 is just not possible. So what happens after bishop to d6? We play bishop to g2. The idea is very simple. Rook to b5 now wins material because you're attacking the knight whilst the bishop attacks the rook and they can't defend each other. So for example, castle, rook to b5. And after knight to e6, saving itself, bishop takes rook is a perfectly fine move. The queens are not on the board. There's no compensation. Yeah, you are giving up the bishop pair, but you're winning in material. and you got better pawns center as well. Position evaluated over +3 or +4 as far as I remember. So in this position, the last thing I'm going to show is what happens after knight to e4 check straight away. King to g2 is the best move, surprisingly, but that means we're not going to be able to, and we're not going to be willing to play bishop to g2. Remember that now you have a threat of playing bishop to c4. If black plays c6, for example, you have a threat of pinning the knight. Such idea is possible. Plays bishop to d6, developing, then bishop b5 check. It's a very strong move. After king to d8, bishop to c6, attacking the knight. So we're going to close all of this by showing what to play next. Okay, knight to c5 to attack the rook. You just play rook to b5. And after rook to c8, because of the attack of our pieces, d4 attacks the knight. The knight moves, let's say knight to e6, rook to e1. And now the black king is completely blocked. He can't really do anything. The threat is like if king tries to go to e7 and the rook tries to develop somehow, well, you still have d5, right? The knight is pinned. And the rook is going to play to f5. So let's see what happens after h6, stopping us from playing, well, of course we're going to play d5, and then bishop to g5 is a massive threat, positionally speaking at least. White wins the game with rook f5, and we're going to win this pawn no matter what. Rook f8 doesn't work, it's not enough. Because of d5, we're going to get rid of that knight. Knight to c5, and rook takes the pawn in f7. We're going to clean up the board. This rook cannot be taken back because of this threat in e8. And in this position, after the move bishop to c6, we saw what happens after knight c5. What happens after knight to f6 doesn't really change much. White plays d4, and after, let's look at this type of idea which we haven't looked at. Remember that this bishop is unchallengeable. He cannot be challenged by anyone. The rook cannot go to e8. You're going to be winning material. Knight to a8 just doesn't do anything. So what happens after this idea? King to c8. The goal is to play rook to b8 and swap stuff. This doesn't work. White plays c4, and after rook to b8, king takes back, and now c5. The bishop will have to move. The only move will be, well, bishop e7, but now white plays rook to e1, attacking the bishop, and the bishop can't be defended in any way unless black plays knight to g8, but it's starting to become a joke. I mean, if that really happens, just play bishop to g5, and now you got enough pressure on that bishop. Of course, the bishop cannot take you because rook e8 is checkmate. So after f6, bishop to f4, and the idea is to play rook to b1 check, king moves, then you can infiltrate the rook in the 7th rank once again, and then play rook a7, and you're winning. This is inevitable. So in this position, even without knight going to g8 and the bishop just going back to d8, white plays rook to e3. The idea is to play rook to b3. There's nothing that really helps now, because our bishop is controlling the way out of this king, and the bishop is stuck. If knight to g4 attacking the rook, just play rook b3 check, king moves, rook to b7. We're going to take in the pawn in a7 and threaten mate. This pawn cannot just be saved. There's nothing else that could have been done, because now rook a7 is a forced mate. So from the start, after e4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, f4, d5, take the pawn in d5, knight takes, take the pawn in e5, knight takes, pawn takes, queen check, king e2, bishop g4, knight f3. We're looking at the variation with knight to c6, and as mentioned, we play queen e1. So earlier we saw what happens after queen e1, king takes, and then black just recapturing, doing all of that effort to recapture the pawn, but black gives up any hope of winning. The black player's best chance will be to keep the pieces on the board. Queen h5 now is the thematic move. White continues with queen to g3, developing and putting more defense over e5. Even though it looks like the knight is pinned, so black can take it, but knight to e5 is actually not possible, because now white plays h3, and the idea is to take the bishop with an attack on the queen. Queen takes rook, but then we can take the knight with check. So now let's see what happens after bishop takes. Looks like it should be fine for black. Bishop takes, pawn takes back, and the position is much better for white. Let's say, for example, bishop to d6, defending the knight and threatening to just castle any side. White goes on with d4 now, and after knight to g6, queen to g5. We're happy to swap pieces even though we got two isolated pawns, but the reason is we have the bishop pair, and the swap is inevitable anyway. And in this position, if instead of bishop d6, black castles long, looks like a completely normal move, d4, and when the knight moves, we're going to be able to play queen to g4, forcing a swap of queens, reuniting the pawns, and also still going to an endgame with the bishop pair and having better chances. Best move by black according to the engine will be queen to f5 now. Obviously, taking the knight now is dangerous. For example, taking with the queen just loses the game immediately. You have to be very careful. Queen takes in c2 with check, bishop takes, looks like we're fine. But now black plays bishop to a3, threat of playing rook to e8 is too strong. It's a nightmare of a position. You're gonna have to give up material. So in this position, the best move is king to d1. And by the way, the queen cannot take in f3. Looks like the best move now, but you can actually take. And after knight takes back, rook to b1. The idea is to play bishop to g2, and that wins the game. The knight is actually quite trapped. Remember the thematic move, knight to h4, bishop to g5, right? So there's nowhere else to go. Bishop to g2 is a massive threat. White is winning. In this position, if not into f3, what happens after bishop to e7? We can't take the knight, right? So we're going to play f4, and we're threatening to take the knight like that. The knight will have to move now. So let's say knight to c6, queen to g4, and the swap of queens is inevitable. So in this position, the last option we're going to look at is what happens after bishop to e7 instead of bishop d6 or long castle. White plays h4. Bishop to h4 would have been very annoying to meet, and now we have a rook supporting that. So after long castle, now white goes on with d4, and we have a very similar scenario to before, because we're going to play rook b1 and so on. I mean, this is literally, let's call it a transposition from one of the previous examples. It is crucial, by the way, let's say knight to c6 now for black to save the knight. It is crucial that you don't allow black to play queen to a5. It's a very good move for black. Now immediately recognize this pattern and trade queens. The trade is inevitable. You're going to reconnect the pawns and play on. And in this position, if instead of long castle, black does a short castle, d4 comes anyway. Let's look at this idea. Knight to g6, putting triple attack over h4. Okay, bishop to d2 is the best move now. And now it's not advisable for black to take with the knight, because then the knight will be pinned. So let's say, for example, bishop to h4 with an attack on our queen. Queen to h3 comes now. And the idea is to win the game with bishop to e1. And now black, let's say, rook, king to d1. You're perfectly safe. And after black's best move, which is queen to d5. Now the black player might finally get rid of this annoying pin with bishop to d3. And this is the most equal game so far. This is black having played only computer moves all the way to move 20 or something. And yeah, now it's like there's a tiny advantage for white, but it's a everything can happen type of game, because the black player is up a pawn, although we are extremely well placed pieces, but we can't castle anymore, and rook b1 can't really happen at this moment because the queen is attacking a2, because queen d5 was just a computer move, of course. And we'll take it from here. So let's go on to the next line so we can have more insights about this Vienna. Let's quickly show this move where black doesn't take the pawn. So knight f6, f4, d5, take, queen h4, king moves, bishop g4, and we're looking at knight c6. Okay, queen e1, we're looking at queen h5, keeping the pieces on the board, queen to g3. Earlier we went through knight takes and how to take it more or less. You're going to play h3 and so on. What happens if black immediately castles? Okay, h3 comes anyway. And remember that we are indeed threatening to take the bishop, because the queen taking the rook is too dangerous. So what happens after bishop to e6 now? Okay, queen to g5, desperate for swaps. And we are gonna get it clearly. So queen takes, knight takes, threatening to take the bishop and damage the pawn structure of our opponents. So after bishop to d5, e6 comes. Boom! I love this move. Now we are stopping the bishop from defending the square f7, and the knight can just go to f7 and trap and fork the two rooks. So the best move according to the engine is rook to e8, pinning the pawn. So white plays king to d1. We don't care about castling. Well, we already lost the right to castle anyway, but the queens are off the board. So what happens after bishop takes? Okay, we take and rook takes. This is surprising because we gave a pawn, even though now we're equal, and black seems to be just fine. However, white goes on with d4, threatening d5. So after rook to f6, best move, bishop to e2. And after developing, bishop to d6, rook to b1. After knight to e7, bishop to g4 comes with check, king to b8. And now bishop to g5. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful position. Look how strong these two pieces are. Rook to g6. If rook goes to f2 now, then bishop to f3 locks the rook in. And now we're going to play bishop h4 and win material. So in this position, black should have played rook to g6, it's a better move, but now bishop to d2. And white has an idea of playing a4, rook to f1, targeting the weak f7 pawn, targeting f7, and obviously targeting the idea of playing a5, a6. Later on, white will have the idea of playing bishop to f3. It's a very strong diagonal. Yeah, there is some advantage for white, but not that great. Remember, this is black playing, but I've kept this moment for the end of the video where black plays only like a computer. This variation will probably never happen to you unless your opponent is so well prepared, but that's never going to be the case. The last line we're going to look at is the following: knight f6, f4, d5. Okay, take, 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 take back, queen h4, king e2, bishop g4, knight f3, and now knight c6, queen e1. We're not going to look at queen h5, we've seen enough, and also queen takes. We're going to look at bishop takes knight. This is important now that you take with the pawn. So if you take with the king, you lose the queen. So here take the pawn, and after queen, king takes, knight takes, pawn in e5, we have an isolated pawn. How to go about here? Remember the thematic move. Ignore the pawn in f4. Remember this, one of the things to learn about the Vienna. Knight takes in f3. We are happy to meet that move because we have the bishop pair. So after king f2, we're attacking the knight. We got great development now. Knight to h4, rook to b1 targeting b7, bishop to d6. Let's see if this variation where black actually will castle, because remember before in the previous examples where the bishop was in c6 and the king can never castle. That's a tremendous position. Rook takes in b7, and now short castle. At least it looks like the black player might be able to play a normal game. c4, thematic move. Rook f to b8 forces a swap of rooks and gives black some idea of finally playing a game. Rook takes, but now c5, bishop to e7, bishop to d3. So how are we winning this game? Well, it's not completely easy, especially when your opponent has been stockfish for the last moves. In a faulty variation, you're winning no matter what. So let's look now, rook to b1, pinning our bishop. Okay, rook to e1. Now we can freely move the bishop because the rook is protected. We're attacking the bishop in e7, by the way, with attempt of infiltration. And there's no threat that this knight and this rook can make from here. Our center is good, and our rook will be much more threatening. So what happens after king f8 defending that? Well, you've seen this move before, right? Maybe not the right move order, and definitely not the same position, but still, rook to e7, right? You've seen it. King takes means you're gonna play bishop g5 and you're winning. Bishop is against the rook. If rook takes in c1, well, then you're winning the pawn, and you've got these two nice passers. So in this situation, if instead of king f8, what happens after knight to g6 to defend the bishop? Okay, king e2, and after bishop to h4 attacking the rook, rook to f1, and now after king to f8, getting ready to play, bishop g6 is the surprising move. Of course, the pawn in f cannot take, black must take with the h pawn, but why did we give up the bishop pair just like that? That's something that I would have never thought of doing, but there's a reason. It's because we have a serious advantage now. c6 comes now with the threat of playing bishop to a3, winning the game, because bishop a3 is check. So after best move, rook to b6, attacking the pawn, d5. You see, now you're starting to see what's the price that black had to pay for forcing us to give away the bishop. Rook to b5, attacking the pawn, c4, rook to a5, and now bishop to f4. It's a very strong move. We're going to be winning material, and we have passed pawns, so we don't care about anything now. Even if black makes a check, we give the pawn, doesn't matter. King to d3, and going to d8 to defend the pawn doesn't work because you have d6. You are taking no matter what, taking back, and then c7, you're winning a bishop. And if instead white black plays rook a4 check, king to c2, it's going to run out of check at some point, and we're going to be winning the pawn.